What's that, Brian? What am I doing? I'm going to needle felt this beagle using this image. Yeah, no, it's a bit of a challenge. Oh, hi there. So yes, I'll talk you through step by step how I'm going to needle felt this dog and share the techniques I use along the way so that you too can needle felt a realistic dog from some photographs. Spoiler alert, he turns out a lot better than Brian here. As I'm not going to use armature for this, you'll need to decide on a stance for your needle felted dog. Mine's going to be standing. So using a printed image that's the actual size of the dog you want to make, use it as a template to estimate how wide a cylinder of core wool you'll need to make the body. As you can see, I've rolled up some core wool so that the left side has more wool than the right. Then use the image to check that the size of the cylinder is going to be about the same as the body of the dog. Remember, it'll reduce by about a third. Stab this cylinder all round, referring to the image as often as you can and shaping the underbelly of the dog. Notice how the belly is thinner just before the hip of its rear legs, but its back is pretty straight. You may need to add more wool to the left side of the body to make it match your image. Getting this core shape right from the start will make all the difference to your finished dog. Keep checking it against your image to get the shape and size accurate. Also, I'd recommend for your first realistic dog that you choose to needle felt a short-haired dog, as I've done here with a beagle, as it'll make it easier to see its true body shape. The front legs are a different shape from the rear legs, so let's take a look at the front legs first. Take a strip of core wool that's a bit wider than the length of the dog's front leg and roll to form a thin cylinder, leaving one end unfelted where we'll attach it. Keep stabbing along the cylinder while rotating. This will reduce in width as you stab it. To form the paw, bend the end over on your mat and stab it into that position. Make sure the legs are well felted so that they're firm. As we're not using wire, they'll need to be firm for the dog to stand. Again, check it against the image to see if it's narrow enough and the right length while holding it onto the body. Make another front leg in exactly the same way. So to make the back legs the same size as usual, I've prepared 2 similar amounts of core wool. You will need a bit more wool on the left hand side of the cylinder than the right as the leg gets thicker towards the top. As we did with the front legs, roll this up and stab into a thin cylinder. However, when it comes to the paws, the back legs are slightly different. Once you've created a small paw at the end of the leg, check against your image to measure where the hind leg has a second joint in it. Work your way up the leg, stabbing this section and holding this second joint in the bent position while you stab it so that it holds that shape. Again, make sure this is well needle felted. Also, keep checking it against the image. You're going to be sick of me saying that. Don't tell anybody, but it's the secret to getting a realistic dog. You may need to add more wool around the top of the leg as it gets much wider here. Think chicken drumsticks. After checking the length and the shape is right against your image, you might need to open up the unfelted end of the leg so that the wool is spread out. This will make it easier to attach to the body, and it's particularly useful if it looks like the leg's going to be slightly long, as you can adjust it. Once you've made the second rear leg, check that they're both a similar length. Now we have 4 legs, let's attach them. Making sure you have the body the right way up with its shaped underbelly towards the bottom. We're going to attach one of the rear legs, making sure it looks the right length before stabbing all round the unfelted splayed out wool. It's hard to show you on the camera, but I could see here that my felted leg was a bit narrower than the image at the top, and the dog's bum cheek also needed building up. So I wrapped a scarf of the same wool around the top of the leg, and a couple of extra pieces of wool at the front of the leg to build it up even more. Attach the second leg in the same way, making sure you're happy with the angle of the leg, and that both feet reach the ground together so that it'll be able to stand. Here you can see there's a dip at the join of the leg that I'll need to fill with a scarf of wool as we did with the first one. Check your front legs against your image. Here I realised this leg was going to be a tiny bit short, so I stabbed some more of the unfelted wool to firm it up and make it a little bit longer. Once you're happy with the length, attach the front legs at each side of the cylinder, spreading out the unfelted wool at the top to attach the leg with. Notice how I've lightly felted it first, and then I'm looking to see that it's in the right position. Once it's attached, again, wrap a scarf of wool around the top. Checking the image of my dog, I can see that the wool needs to bulge out more around the shoulder area. So I've taken a small amount of wool and formed a small pad, which I'll then attach just above the leg. Repeat the same process for the other leg, making sure your dog can stand okay. If you've chosen a standing position, of course. Now look at your image and check for any areas where the shape of the body doesn't match your image. Here you can see I'm defining where its leg comes away from the body by stabbing around the dog's rear hip joint. So if you've watched my 5 tips video on shaping, you'll know that to help break down complicated shapes, such as the dog's head, I advise that you trace the dog's head from your image and break that complicated shape down into simple ones. So here the head became an oval ball shape and an unusual cylinder, with a purple section that we'll need to build up. First roll up some core wool into a slightly oval ball. Using your tracing as a template for the size, stab this all round to form an oval shape. Check this against your tracing and add more wool if necessary. Make sure the head is firmly felted so that when we add needle felted details onto the head later, it won't affect the shape of the head. Now you're going to build up the shaded area above his nose. Fold up a piece of core wool and wrap it around the top half of the oval, so that it bulks out just one side of the head. This will form a slight ridge for his eyebrows. Once felted, check it against your tracings and if necessary add some more in the same way. Check one more time just to make sure. Next we're going to make the snout area. Take some wool and roll it into a short cylinder. As you start to stab it, decide which side is which and keep referring to the shape on your tracing. Keeping this shape in your mind while stabbing will help form it. Notice it has a flat top and a rounded bottom. I'm holding it here by the unfelted wool where we'll attach it to the rest of the head. Once you have the rough shape of the snout, place it on the head directly under the area we've just built up. Stab all around the snout to attach it well. Then take a strip of wool and wrap it round where the snout attaches to cover the join and build up the area slightly. So now we're going to look at images from the front and the top of the dog you're making, and look at the shape of the dog's muzzle or snout. Here I can see that I need to shape the sides. So to do this I'm going to roll up a small amount of wool and lay it across the side where I want to make it a smoother join to the head. Repeat this on the other side so that they're equal. Also looking at the image from the front, I can see that my felted head is too narrow near the top. So I'm going to take some wool and build out the cheekbones either side of where the eyes sit. Take two similar sized pieces of wool and shape it with your fingers into a disc of wool. Stab this wool onto the side of the head parallel with where the eyes will go. Now you're going to work out the size and the shape of the dog's neck by placing the body and the head onto the printout. This will show you the shape needed for the neck. So roll up a thin strip of wool into a narrow cylinder, stab around the middle and while rotating leave each end unfelted, as we're going to use one end to attach it to the body and the other end for the head. Spread out one end and attach this to the end of the body, making sure you stab it well down into the body cylinder. Then spread out the other end of the neck so you can use this to attach the head. At this point, check that you've got the neck length right against your picture. You may need to shorten it slightly by pulling some of the wool away. This looks a bit brutal and a mess at the moment, but trust me, it'll be fine. And better this than accidentally making a giraffe. Also, needle felt down into the end of the neck to shorten it and compact it more. Keep checking until it's the right length, and once you're happy with it, stab up into the head and down into the neck while holding the head in position. You may need to add a scarf of wool to secure the head and hide the join. Check that your neck is wide enough. You might want to add more wool around the neck to help shape it. Now before we go any further, we're going to check that we've got the size of the dog's head correct in relation to the length of its body. Using our side view picture with a pencil, measure from the tip of his nose to the back of his head. Then see how many times this length goes into the rest of his body. So on my image it's 2.5 times, and on my felted dog it's also 2.5 times. This way I know that I have the head about the right length. But what about from the front? As I look at him from the front, his head looks small. I know that his ears will make him look bigger, but even so it's worth checking. So as we can see, I've drawn an outline from the front view of my dog, and I've outlined round the head without his ears. Then I'm going to see how many times his head will go into the width across his chest. It goes 1.25 times, or 1.25. So to work out how wide my felted head should be in proportion to his chest, measure the width of his chest and divide it by 1.25, i.e. 20 divided by 1.25, which gives 16. This means the head should be 16/16ths, or an inch wide. And as you can see, it's only 11/16ths of an inch at the moment. If I wrapped wool all around his head, it would increase the height of his head as well, which we don't want to do. Instead, I'm going to take 2 pieces of wool and almost fold the wool into a flat cylinder and stab it lightly just a few times to make an oval patch of wool. Attach this to the side of the dog's head and do the same on the other side. Now if you measure again, you can see his head is almost an inch or 16/16ths wide. It's near enough for me, and it has made his head a much rounder and better shape. If you look at the photo of your dog that you're making, you'll notice that the dog's fur is rarely one flat colour, so it's best to blend 2 or more colours together. Here I'm mixing some light brown merino wool with some slightly darker mid-brown wool. Notice how I'm hand carding it or mixing it up together. This will make it easier to apply onto your dog. Take some of this wool and place it over the leg or wherever it's appropriate for the dog you're making. Working on a very small area at a time, stab this wool lightly, using your needle to guide the wool and determine where the edges will be. Go over the whole area, stabbing lightly. If you do have some needle marks, it can help to rub over it with your fingers. I also have another tip for helping these marks disappear that I'll show you later on. The other colours I used for this dog was black mixed with a small amount of the light brown and mid-brown wool, but make sure you mix it up well. In the same way as before, work all over the dog, giving him his distinctive markings. Looking at lots of pictures of beagles, I noticed that often they have light brown colour around their eyes, leaving a white strip up the middle of the head. Really pay attention to the photos you have of the dog you're trying to recreate. And using reference points like the eyes, ears, shoulders or legs, apply the appropriate colour for your dog. I recommend that you take a break at least once while felting this dog, not just because it takes a long time and you'll need one, but because you'll find that when you come back to it, you'll see things that need altering that you hadn't noticed before. That's what happened here. I noticed his mouth and jowls were too narrow and needed some further shaping. To fix this, roll a small amount of core wool into a flat oval shape and stab it into the area that needs building up. Then to make the jowls, make 2 thin oval shapes and attach it either side of the dog's mouth. These will hang down slightly. To form the bottom jaw of the mouth, fold over another piece of wool and hold the 2 ends, which we'll leave unfelted. Stab around the fold to form the bottom jaw of the mouth. Then attach by stabbing into position to the bottom of the head. Keep referring to your image to check that you're shaping the mouth the same as your picture. Getting the eyes in the right place can be tricky. This is the technique I used on this beagle. Taking the image of the dog looking straight forward, I'd suggest you trace around the front view of the dog's head. Try to imagine the ears aren't there, and if the dog you're doing is furry, try to imagine it without the fur. Also trace where the eyes are on the image. I figured if we can work out how wide apart the eyes need to be, then we can work out where they should be on the head. So I measured the width of the dog head on my tracing, 1.5 inches wide or 24/16, and measured between the centre of each eye, which was 3/4 of an inch wide or 12/16. So for me this worked out very simple. The eyes were half the width of the head. In other words, 12 divided by 24 is 0.5. This won't be the same for every dog though. Different breeds and dogs have different width of eyes, so you'll have to work out how far apart your dog's eyes are. Take the measurement of your eyes on the picture and divide it by the head width, then times the result, R, by the width of your felted head. This will give you the width the eyes should be on your felted head. So for example, let's say on the image of your dog the eyes were 2 inches apart and the head was 3.25 inches wide. So 2 divided by 3.25 is 0.615. Then let's say your felted head was 1 inch wide. So 1 inch times 0.615 is 0.615 of an inch. 0.615 times 16 gives almost 10/16 of an inch, or 5/8 of an inch apart. I hope this makes sense. So measuring my felted head, it is 1 inch wide. So that means that the centre of the eyes should be a 1/2 inch apart. That's 1 times 0.5 equals 0.5. So if I hold the ruler so that 1/2 an inch is in the centre of his head, leaving 1/4 of an inch each side, I can use the needles to mark where the eyes need to go. Mark these 2 positions by stabbing a few times as you take the needles out. Then we need to use an awl to make these holes much bigger so that you can get the eye into the head. I'm using 4mm black plastic safety eyes. They're called safety eyes as they usually have a kind of washer that holds them in place when used on fabric toys. So they have ridges on the posts which hold that washer in place, but we're not going to use them like that. So I filed the ridges off so that they went into the head a bit easier. As you can see, I had to waggle the awl around to make the hole wide enough. Also, I found it helped if I made a recess by needle felting around the hole for the eyes to sit into. Once you can get the eyes easily into the hole, take some super glue and put a tiny bit on the posts and push them into the holes. Be careful to wipe away any excess glue. Next, I add a bit more light brown wool to round the eyes. So now you need to shape the eyes by adding eyelids. Take a very small amount of the light brown wool and pull it apart into a thin strip. Stab this down in the middle just to form a small oval of wool. You might want to hold it between some foam and a ruler, or 2 rulers, so that you can neaten up the edges more. You then attach this across the top of the eye and trim off any excess wool. Now you need to shape it. Looking at my image of the dog, his eye is slanted up from corner to corner, so I'm using the angle of my needle to stab it down into the corner of the eye and to open the eyelid slightly. Now in the same way as before, make another small eyelid. However, this is for the bottom of the eye. Place right under the pupil and stab it in the corner of the eye and around the bottom. Don't worry if the eye looks closed, you'll be able to adjust that in a moment. See how I'm angling my needle in the direction I want the wool to go? This is making the eye open up by forcing the bottom eyelid down. You can do this with the top eyelid too. This is quite fiddly, so take your time and make sure you're happy with the shape of the eyes. I did the same for the other eye, adding some more light brown wool around the eye and attaching the eyelids in exactly the same way. Have a look at both of your eyes and make sure they match. You could trace the dog's ear from the picture of your dog. As Beagle's ears are fairly flat, this worked quite well, but this depends on the breed of the dog you're making. Lay some light brown wool out onto your mat and cut out and use this tracing as a template for each ear. Stab all around the template, then remove the template and stab all over the middle, folding in the excess wool into the middle and stabbing that down. Make sure you don't lose the shape of the ear though. Stab until it's a lot less fuzzy. You may also need to hold it between the sponge mat and the ruler to neaten up the edges. I didn't follow my own advice here, which is that if you're making two of something, always get 2 equal amounts of wool before you start. So for my second ear, I used slightly less wool, but I made it in the same way using the same template so that it helped make it look the same size. It just worked out slightly thinner. Before you attach these ears, make sure you look at the picture of your dog and look how far up the head they need attaching and how long they hang or stick up from the head depending on the breed. Once you're happy with the positioning and angle, stab lightly along the top of the ear to secure it to the head. Careful here not to break your needle, as you may well hit the posts of the eyes as you're stabbing into the head. I'm also trying to shape the ear a little bit more here. If it helps, you can pin the ear to the head to check it's in the right position before attaching. Some people make dog noses from polymer clay, which I did think about, but I wanted to keep this dog as simple as possible, so I decided to make his nose from black wool. You've just watched me make the first nose, which once I'd finished it I realised was too big and was going to stick out too much from the muzzle. So I decided to take a slightly different approach and took a lot less black wool and rolled it into a ball and attached it to the end of the snout and shaped it while I was attaching it. This meant it didn't bulk out the end of his snout too much. Don't forget to keep referring to your picture for the shape and size. Making sure you refer to your image to get the length. Take a piece of core wool that's approximately as wide as the length of the tail that you need. Roll it into a thin cylinder. This is just to make a base to work onto. Stab all around in the middle and keep rotating until you have a long thin cylinder. I was just going to cover this with a mixture of black and brown wool to form the tail shape, but once I'd done that I wasn't happy with how it was. And looking at pictures of beagles I noticed their tails look quite bushy and thought I'd apply some wool using the fur technique instead. Taking some strands of black mixed with brown merino roving or tops wool, cut them into short strips. Then leave a short length of the cream wool at the top of the tail. You're then going to place them across the tail with the strands running parallel to the tail. Then stab in a line around the middle of the pieces of wool to attach them. Then once they're attached, gently push them up towards the tip. Then place the next row of wool about 1/8 of an inch or about 3 millimeters further down the tail. Repeat this all the way down the tail, leaving a bit to attach it with. This did prove very time consuming, but hopefully you think it's worth it. Feel free to let me know in the comments. Trim the length of some of the wool to make it slightly less bushy, but be careful not to trim too much. Just take very small amounts at a time. I found combing it helped a lot. Refer to your image to make sure you attach the tail in the right place. Trim any excess wool and felt in the ends. Next, take a small amount of the black and brown mixture and wrap a scarf of wool around the base of the tail to securely attach it. This will flatten the base of the tail slightly, so you may need to add another ring of blended merino roving or tops wool. This needed a bit more trimming and neatening to make the join look better. The final thing to do was add a bit of colouring around his mouth area. Take a few strands of black wool and place them under his nose. Looking at photos of beagles, they have a slightly grey, almost triangular area between their nose and mouth. Then take a few strands of reddish brown and a few strands of mid-brown coloured wool. Mix them together and take a tiny amount. Roll it between your fingers to form a very thin sausage and attach it to the mouth area just to suggest the insides of its mouth. At this point, however, I felt there was too much black under his nose, so I used a sewing needle and pulled out some of the black strands and removed them, which left it a bit more of a subtle colouring under his nose. I mentioned earlier a tip about making the stab marks disappear, but I believe this technique also helps to reduce the fuzziness of the finished project. What I've found is that if you angle your needle across the surface of the wool and work your way around its back, you can tease some more of the loose fuzzy strands that may be sticking out from the dog and get a smoother finish. I found with this beagle that by going over the whole dog in this way, it reduces the needle marks and the fuzziness. Just be careful you don't do this in one place too much, as you can move the coloured wool around. Next, I went over the whole dog, neatening up any areas that looked fuzzy until I was satisfied. I can still see areas that could be improved, but I was fairly pleased with it. Let me know in the comments what you think. And to watch my 5 tips on getting your proportions right, click here. Thanks for watching.